Hello everyone and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start with the Namo Tassa as usual. Feel free to join in. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone. Today we have the fourth and last session of our series, Skillfully Building Your Dhamma Practice, where we have talked about different types of people and how they should practice in different ways in order to make progress on the path. And so far what we have looked at was the different types, especially we have looked at the faith type, the wisdom type, and the samadhi type. And those are sort of characteristics of the mind or of a specific person that are fairly consistent for a long period of time. For many people, that will be the same. They will be the same type, or they will have the same dominant faculty in the mind all the way from the beginning of the practice until they reach arahantship. For some people, that might change, but it doesn't really change very often. So that's really a sort of fairly stable feature of the mind, and it's very important to know which type you are, because depending on that, you should pick your teachers, you should pick your practices that you're doing, you should pick your meditation methods, and that will greatly facilitate making progress on the path. Today, we are looking at the issue from a slightly different angle, because while there is this consistency over time, obviously, the mind also changes all the time, from day to day, from minute to minute, and from practice session to practice session. So if we always do the same exact meditation method, then number one, our practice may become stale, it may become boring, it may not work that well, and also it may not be appropriate for the particular situation. So maybe one day you would have a lot of hindrances in the mind. Maybe one day you'd be very restless. The next day you'd be very tired. One day you'd be very angry. And so if you have like these different qualities in your mind, you need to have suitable strategies for addressing each and every different problem. So even though you might be generally the same type all the time, still the mind has different qualities that are present there and that change and that need to be addressed, and that the practice needs to be adapted to. Or even on the positive side, sometimes you might feel very inspired, or you might feel especially calm, or you might have made a specific insight on that day that you want to focus on or want to contemplate on. So also you could have positive qualities in the mind that might be worth focusing on in that moment. And even if let's say you're generally a wisdom type, so you would usually do contemplation practices, maybe one day you are especially inspired by the Buddha or by the Dhamma, or you feel especially calm, so you feel it's much better today to do a samadhi practice or some kind of devotional practice. Or maybe you are generally a samadhi type, but one day you felt like you had just this amazing insight and you want to focus more on developing that area. So whatever happened on that particular day, that particular moment, when we start meditating, we just check in, like, what's going on with us today? What does our mind actually need, and what is appropriate for us to practice in that particular day or that particular time? So our practice needs to be somewhat flexible, and we need to have a good understanding of what's going on internally, and also what kind of methods can we use that are appropriate for us and appropriate for that situation, to make the best use of whatever is going on in that moment. So that is what the sutta today focuses on. It doesn't really talk about different types, but it focuses on what to do in specific situations with our practice. So the sutta we are reading today is from the Samyutta Nikaya. It's called the Agi Sutta, or the Sutta on Fire. And it's number 46.53. I've put a link in the live chat. So we are reading from Bhante Sujato's translation, and you're most welcome to read along if you like. So the sutta begins. Then several mendicants robed up in the morning and taking their bowls and robes entered Savatthi for alms. And then there's a note here that says this is the same as in the previous discourse. So there's a part of this discourse that hasn't been repeated here because the sutta before already stated everything. So what happened there is that a group of monastics met some other non-Buddhist ascetics or non-Buddhist practitioners, and they had a discussion together. And the non-Buddhist ascetics asked the monastics, the Buddhist monastics, about the 5 hindrances. And then the Buddhist monastics didn't answer. And they went back to the Buddha and they thought, well, we'll just check with the Buddha what the Buddha has to say about this. And so they went back to the Buddha and they told the Buddha what had happened. And then the Buddha takes this as an opportunity to give a dhamma teaching. And this is where the sutta now picks up again with the Buddha starting his dhamma talk based on a question that was about the 5 hindrances. And now the Buddha says, mendicants, when wanderers who follow other paths say this, you should say to them, reverence, which awakening factors should not be developed when the mind is sluggish, and which awakening factors should be developed at that time? Which awakening factors should not be developed when the mind is restless, and which awakening factors should be developed at that time? So the Buddha here sets the theme for this sutta, and this sutta will be about the 7 awakening factors, so the 7 bojjhangas, in relationship to the hindrances. And of course, I think most of our listeners, people tuning in today, will be familiar with the 7 awakening factors. To recap briefly, the first one is sati, so mindfulness. The second one is dhammavichaya, so investigation of phenomena. The third one is virya, energy. The fourth one is piti, so that means rapture or joy. The fifth one is passaddhi, or tranquility. The sixth one is samadhi, so concentration, immersion, however you want to translate samadhi. And then the 7th one is upekkha, equanimity. So these are the awakening factors, and that's what this sutta is about, how to develop those and the relationship they have in counteracting the hindrances in the mind. And depending on which hindrance is in the mind, we need to develop different ones of those factors. So we don't develop all 7 at the same time. Depending on what the mind needs at that particular time, we develop 1 or more of them, but not all 7 at the same time. And of course, for an arahant, these are the factors that they have developed to perfection. So if we manage to develop them to perfection, that's when we are able to break through to arahantship. But for people on the path, they will usually have them to varying degrees. And so we all need to focus on developing them further. And that's, of course, part of the practice. And as I mentioned, we develop them, different ones at different times, depending on which kind of problems or which kind of features we have in our mind at that particular time. So, and then the Buddha continues and he says, questioned like this, the wanderers who follow other paths would be stumped and in addition would get frustrated. Why is that? Because they're out of their element. So the Buddha here says, This is a teaching, the 7 Bojjhangas in relationship to the 5 hindrances. This is a teaching that is specific to Buddhism. So people who follow other spiritual paths would not be able to answer such kind of questions. So here, I don't want to focus on whatever other religions are saying or other paths are saying. So we're just going to move on with the sutta. It doesn't really matter what people of other paths are practicing. But the Buddha says, I don't see anyone in this world, with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its gods and humans, who could provide a satisfying answer to these questions, except for the realized one or his disciple or someone who has heard it from them. So this is again stating that this is a teaching that is very specific to the Buddha. And then now the Buddha starts teaching about those awakening factors. And he says, when the mind is sluggish, it's the wrong time to develop the awakening factors of tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. Why is that? Because it's hard to stimulate a sluggish mind with these things. Suppose someone wanted to make a small fire flare up. If they toss wet grass, cow dung, and timber on it, spray it with water, and scatter dirt on it, could they make it flare up? No, sir. In the same way, when the mind is sluggish, it's the wrong time to develop the awakening factors of tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. Why is that? Because it's hard to stimulate a sluggish mind with these things. So the Buddha begins first by talking about a situation where we have a mind that is very tired, that has very low energy. So this obviously is connected to primarily connected to the hindrance of sloth and torpor, and is opposed to the hindrance of restlessness, which the Buddha will talk about in a minute. But really, this can be an expression of any of the 5 hindrances. So it also can be an expression of greed or of aversion. If we are very, very greedy, and it's a very active greed where we really crave for something, then usually that makes our mind very restless. But if we have been craving for something the whole time, then after a while we can feel very, very burnt out and very tired. So greed can also lead to a very tired states in the mind. Or the same for aversion. If we have a very active aversion, very strong anger, we have a lot of energy, we feel very, very restless. But if there's just an underlying feeling of irritation that we experience the whole time, then that can drain us very strongly of energy and can leave us feel very tired. So having a tired mind can be connected to basically all of the hindrances, except of course for restlessness. The same also for doubt. Doubt is the last of the 5 hindrances. If we have very active doubt, that makes our mind very restless. But if the doubt is just nagging at the back of our mind, am I really practicing correctly? Is this really a viable path? Was the Buddha really correct in teaching these kind of things? If it's just nagging subconsciously, eating at us the whole time, then this is something that can drain us and can make us very tired. So in that way, restlessness and sluggishness could be connected to pretty much all of the hindrances, depending on how exactly we experience them. So the Buddha here says, at a time when the mind is tired, is sluggish, and has low energy, then there are some awakening factors that we should cultivate and some that we should not cultivate. Especially here he says, first, the ones that we should not cultivate are the ones tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. And we don't cultivate tranquility, immersion, and equanimity at the time when we're tired, because the mind already has low energy. So if we focus on more tranquility and those calming factors, calming awakening factors, then we get even more tired. So what the mind actually needs at that time is getting uplifted a little bit, getting a little bit more energy. So these 3 factors are the wrong factors to focus on at that time. And the Buddha says it's like a fire. There's a small fire and we want to make it bigger, so the fire doesn't have enough energy. But we actually put wet grass on it and we sprinkle it with water, then obviously the fire is going to die down even more. And obviously we cannot make the fire flare up in that way. In the same way, we cannot practice tranquility, immersion, and equanimity at that time if we already feel very sluggish and tired. And to connect this with what we have talked about so far about the different types of people, of the 7 awakening factors, 6 of them are actually connected with either samadhi practice or vipassana practice. So 6 of them, some of them are dominant factors for people who are wisdom types, and some of them are dominant practices for people who are the samadhi types. So depending on which type you are, you can avoid certain factors, or you can develop certain factors. Also depending on which type you are and depending on what your mind state is at that particular time. So for the wisdom types, the 3 dominant factors are usually the investigation of phenomena, because that's obviously a wisdom function, and then energy and equanimity, because equanimity is what we develop when we make insights into reality as it actually is, especially towards the impermanence of things and the suffering aspect of things. That's where we develop equanimity. So those 3 are the wisdom factors: investigation of phenomena, energy, and equanimity. And then there are the other 3 factors that are mainly connected with samadhi practice are piti. Piti, or rapture, is a samadhi factor. We know this is a factor that is present in the jhanas. And then tranquility obviously is a samadhi factor, and samadhi itself is also a samadhi factor. So those are the 3 factors that are usually connected with samadhi practice, and that will be easy to develop for the samadhi types. So here in this case, when the Buddha says the mind is sluggish, the things to avoid for the samadhi types are tranquility and immersion. The thing to avoid for the wisdom types is equanimity practice. So then the Buddha talks about 3 things to cultivate in the situation where the mind is tired and has low energy. And the Buddha says, when the mind is sluggish, it's the right time to develop the awakening factors of investigation of principles, energy, and rapture. Why is that? Because it's easy to stimulate a sluggish mind with these things. Suppose someone wanted to make a small fire flare up. If they toss dry grass, cow dung, and timber on it, blow on it, and don't scatter dirt on it, could they make it flare up? Yes, sir. In the same way, when the mind is sluggish, it's the right time to develop the awakening factors of investigation of principles, energy, and rapture. Why is that? Because it's easy to stimulate a sluggish mind with these things. So here we still have a mind that is low in energy, but now the Buddha tells us what we should actually do. And he says there are the other 3 awakening factors, which are investigation of principles, energy, and rapture. And that's what usually energizes the mind. That's what combats the tiredness of our mind. So that's what we should focus on our practice. If we sit down on the cushion and we check in with our mind and we see, oh, today I'm especially tired, then this is the kind of practices that we need to do, focusing on these 3 factors. And the Buddha says it's like a small fire. If we want to add energy to it, make it bigger, make it brighter, then obviously we need to put dry grass on it, and we need to blow on it. Then the fire will flare up. So in the same way, we use these 3 helpful awakening factors if the mind is very sluggish. And again, these are connected either with wisdom practice or with samadhi practice. So for the wisdom types, helpful factors to cultivate in that situation is investigation of principles and energy. And for the samadhi types, a helpful thing to cultivate in that situation is rapture or joy, piti. So whichever type you are, whether you are a wisdom type or a samadhi type, there's always a helpful fact, one or two helpful factors to cultivate in the situation, and one or two factors to avoid in the situation where your mind is very tired. And now we are talking about the opposite, the situation where the mind has too much energy, where the mind is very restless. So the Buddha continues, when the mind is restless, it's the wrong time to develop the awakening factors of investigation of principles, energy, and rapture. Why is that? Because it's hard to settle a restless mind with these things. Suppose someone wanted to extinguish a bonfire. If they toss dry grass, cow dung, and timber on it, blow on it, and don't scatter dirt on it, could they extinguish it? No, sir. In the same way, when the mind is restless, it's the wrong time to develop the awakening factors of investigation of principles, energy, and rapture. Why is that? Because it's hard to settle a restless mind with these things. So here we are talking about the opposite. This is when we sit down on our cushion and we see our mind is very restless today. That could be just plain restlessness. It could be active anxiety. It could be active desire. It could be active aversion, anger, something happened. We are full of rage. All these kind of hindrances can lead to a lot of restlessness in the mind. So it doesn't matter which of the 5 hindrances makes you restless. Any kind of restlessness means that your mind has too much energy and needs to be settled down a little. And the Buddha says in that kind of situation, we should not focus on 3 awakening factors, namely investigation of principles, energy, and rapture, because those 3 make the mind more energized. They stir up the mind even more. So those are not helpful for the mind to settle down. And he uses the image, of course, of the bonfire, the big bonfire. And if you toss more fuel on the fire and you blow on it, obviously the fire will burn even brighter and your restlessness would get even stronger. So the 3 awakening factors to be avoided in that situation, again, investigation of principles, energy, and rapture. And again, these investigation of principles and energy are the 2 things that the wisdom types need to avoid. And rapture is the one that the samadhi type needs to avoid in that situation. And then finally, we come to the thing what we should be doing when we have a restless mind. And the Buddha says, when the mind is restless, it's the right time to develop the awakening factors of tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. Why is that? Because it's easy to settle a restless mind with these things. Suppose someone wanted to extinguish a bonfire. If they toss wet grass, cow dung, and timber on it, spray it with water, and scatter dirt on it, could they extinguish it? Yes, sir. In the same way, when the mind is restless, it's the right time to develop the awakening factors of tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. Why is that? Because it's easy to settle a restless mind with these things. So when we are restless, these are the 3 factors that we should focus on, namely tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. And because these are things that add more stillness to the mind, more calmness to the mind, that will bring the energy level down, that will help us to settle, that will help the mind to be more stable. So it's, as the Buddha says, if you have a big bonfire and you put wet stuff on it and you spray water on it, then the fire will die down. In the same way, we need to cultivate these three factors: tranquility, immersion, and equanimity. And again, for the samadhi types, they will be predominantly working with tranquility and immersion, whereas the wisdom types would be predominantly working with equanimity at that particular time. So basically, depending on the mind state that you have at that particular time, depending on the hindrances or whatever other factors are dominant in your mind at the particular time, and depending on which general type you are, you can focus on one or more of these factors of awakening to counteract those hindrances and to bring the mind into balance. So we're not trying to make our mind super, super calm at all costs. We're trying to have a middle ground between too little energy and too much energy. If the mind is too calm and too sleepy, it's also not helpful for our meditation. Even for the samadhi types, tranquility obviously is good, but the mind still needs to be awake and active enough to be awake and not to be sleepy. Like, we don't want to just blank out and be in like some kind of stupor and some kind of half unconscious state. So in meditation, we always need mental clarity, and for that we need a certain middle ground or middle amount of energy. So we're always trying to bring the mind back into balance. If it's too little energy, raise the energy up. If there's too much energy, bring the energy down. So that's again something that we can experiment with. That's something that takes practice and that takes a lot of skill. So something that develops over a long period of time. And of course, I have not read out the last sentence of the sutta yet. The last sentence is, but mindfulness is always useful, I say. So there are actually 7 awakening factors. So far, we have only talked about 6 because those 6 neatly fall into two groups of 3 factors. But there's one more, that is sati, mindfulness. And mindfulness doesn't fall into any category. And mindfulness is also not specific to any kind of type, whether the wisdom type or the samadhi type. Mindfulness is something that is necessary for all kinds of practices, for all types of people, for all kinds of situations, whether your mind is sluggish or whether your mind is overactive or whether whatever hindrance is present. Or even if you meditate, or if you don't meditate, if you just live your ordinary life, mindfulness is something that we all need for all people at all times as we practice, and that's something we can always focus on and always develop. So mindfulness is the one of the 7 factors that you can not go wrong with, that you can always focus on. So this is the sutta for today. What I've tried to do today is combine the different types that we have studied so far in the last 3 sessions with practices that we need to do in the moment each and every day when our mind is very changing, and while our type is stable, the mind in the particular situation might change from day to day, from moment to moment. And so our practice can't be automatic. We can't just use the same type of meditation all the time. We need to have a whole toolkit of different practices that we can do, slightly different focuses that we can apply to our meditation, different techniques that we might be using depending on what is the predominant factor in our mind, so that whatever is going on in our mind, we can come back to the middle ground from whatever extreme our mind has gone to, whether that's extreme lust or extreme hatred or extreme restlessness or extreme sleepiness or whatever other state that's troubling us and that's making our mind unpeaceful. So even if we know our type, doesn't mean we can do the same kind of meditation every single day. We still need to take into account what's going on internally. So again, the meditation is a very, very individual path, and everybody needs to develop their own approach and needs to find what works for them. And it includes a lot of experimentation. It includes a lot of trial and error. And it's really a skill that develops over a long period of time. And so I think this sutta is one of the suttas that encourages us to experiment and to develop those skills, and to also experiment with our practice, because at different times we need different types of practices. So just try out various things and see what works. And I think at this point, I'm going to end the sutta discussion and we can move over to questions. If you have any questions or comments, you could leave them in the live chat and I will see if I can answer them. So I see quite a few thank yous. I see only one question so far, which is from Pial and Indira. And they say, where does the 7 factors for enlightenment fit in the Noble Eightfold Path? It looks like to me the first 3 factors belong to right mindfulness, and the last 4 are features of jhana. So it looks like basically it's an expansion of right mindfulness and right concentration. Aya, what is your take on this? So, well, we have different categories of Dhamma teachings that all kind of fit together like a puzzle. So in some way, yes, we can connect them with the Noble Eightfold Path in the way that you explained just now. The Buddha explained it in many different ways. Another method that he explained it is, for example, in the Anapanasati Sutta, where he connected breath meditation with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and then said that by fulfilling the 4 foundations of mindfulness, so again, doing a lot of sati practice, mindfulness practice, that would lead to the development of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So there are different approaches of how we can get there and how we can develop things. And also there are different ways of how we develop all these factors. For example, you mentioned the factor, the last 4 factors, here you say the last 4 factors are features of jhana, which is true. On the other hand, one of the last 4 factors also is upekkha. Upekkha, equanimity. Equanimity is also one of the Brahma Viharas. So we don't necessarily only develop upekkha through jhana. We can also develop it through Brahma Vihara practice. Upekkha is also very, very strongly connected to the vipassana methods, to insight practices, because that's what insight into reality as it actually is should lead to. If we do it properly and we investigate the 3 characteristics, so anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and non-self or impersonal nature, then what should strongly develop out of that vipassana practice is equanimity. So there are so all these things kind of fit together and have all sorts of connections with all sorts of different Dhamma teachings. They certainly connect with the Eightfold Path, but they also connect with a lot of other teachings. Basically, once you kind of investigate them a little bit deeper, you see how they all fit together very beautifully. And then Gita asks, Aya, I have also read the 7 factors can lead to Nibbana. What are your thoughts? Yes, definitely. That is the name already itself. The 7 bojjhangas, so the 7 factors of awakening, they lead to awakening. And obviously, awakening is what leads to Nibbana. So basically, these two are synonyms. So certainly, these are the 7 factors that we need to develop in order to reach arahantship and to reach Nibbana. And as I mentioned in the beginning, once you are an arahant, then you would have perfected all these 7 factors. Or seen the other way around, once you have perfected all these 7 factors, that's when you can expect to make the breakthrough to arahantship. So certainly these are teachings that are very important for the higher stages on the path. And as I mentioned before, for example, in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha said that if you're able to strongly develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness, then this is what will be very helpful for the development of those 7 factors, which will then enable you to become an arahant. So yes, I think you're correct. Certainly these 7 factors are very immediate causes for the attainment of Nibbana. So I see no further question. There's one more comment from AS, and they say, I think patience is important to cultivate with this. I think patience, so khanti in Pali, is certainly a very important quality on the path, because the path is gradual and sometimes it can seem very slow. So khanti is one of the paramis. So khanti certainly is a quality that is extremely helpful, because it takes time to develop those kind of skills. It takes time to develop meditation practice. Just like any other kind of skill, nobody is born perfect. And as you cultivate it, you get better at it. And the Buddha also said famously in the Ovada Patimokkha Gata that khanti, patience is the highest austerity. So no matter what kind of austere, horrendous practices you would inflict on your body, and whatever tortures you can inflict on yourself in the way of doing religious austerities, nothing of this even compares to the practice of patience. So the highest kind of austerity that you could do is the patience practice, because if you develop patience, then you actually have the mental quality to be able to develop the other stages on the path. So certainly patience is an important quality in Buddhism, but of course there are also many, many other qualities that are important. So that is the last question or comment I see so far. If there are no further questions, then we can finish for today. I hope you all benefited from our mini-series about skillfully building your practice. I hope you all were able to figure out which type you are, and I hope you all got some ideas of how you can build your practice around that. So for now, I think we can finish. And as usual, we will do that with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you want, then I will see you all next Tuesday. Otherwise, have a good day and have a good rest of the week. And good luck with your practice.